Hi. I'm introducing our new guest. He reads physics at Manchester University, but he was always had the passion, writing software to solve interesting problems. And looking at the companies he founded and the kind of application they make, I think he had a lot of fun. A warm welcome to Alex Powell.
Okay, hello everybody, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Alex Powell. I'm CTO, COO of SoftPower, and we produce two applications, one for Formula One and one for MotoGP. But the Formula one is probably the beginning of the story. Oh, sorry. Okay. So these are the two applications in the App Store for sale. They're a little bit unusual. We're one of the most expensive apps in the App Store that's sort of for global sale and for mass market, which is interesting because it gives us a unique position compared to an awful lot of the apps out there. We get a lot of attention because we're expensive, but we get over it. So this is Formula One. To the viewers, glamorous lifestyles, exciting races, crashes, victories, rich yachts, all the fancy stuff that you see on TV. Not for us, I'm afraid. For us, it's a bit more business-like. We're a 24/7 type operation, really. I was going through the calendar, and for those not familiar with Formula One and how it looks, there are 24 drivers. There are 19 races this year. They are in 18 different countries, which are in 11 different time zones, I counted. So there's quite a logistical challenge. Obviously, all the work's at the weekend, but the sessions start on Friday. Actually, we start on Thursday because we test everything beforehand. So they start on Thursday, they run to the end of Sunday, and quite often, if there's a back-to-back race, you'll be starting again before you know where you were on the next Thursday. You have 3 days down and 4 days up. So it's a rather busy business. So how do we start? Well, the story of how you start is often quite different to all that glamorous lifestyle. This is my daughter and Alison on the left and Olivia on the right. And when Alison was 6 months old, she went to a thing they have in Oxford called Monkey Music, which is a little session where all the mothers get together and their kids play tunes and beat drums and things together. And Alison got very attached to Olivia, and Olivia got very attached to Alison. So they became firm friends. So the families had to meet, and it turned out Olivia's father was a VP of Honda Motor Racing at the time. So that was very interesting. At the same time, I run a business. I was already running a business. I started my own business in 2006 from the ashes of another business, and we do kind of bespoke e-learning content production, which if you're not familiar with that, it's basically we build things to requirements. So big customers come to us, they ask us to build stuff, we tell them how much it costs, we deliver the product, and we go and do the next one. Quite a different business. But we've been going for a little while, and I bought myself an iPod Touch in Christmas 2007, little Christmas present. Didn't really think I was going to use it for that much other than playing with, but it was a good excuse. And then the App Store launched, so I got quite excited by it, and we could suddenly write apps ourselves. So I put together an app, and in fact it's still in the store, Club Kit, I think it's there, for a different company name, Excion. And that was my first app. It took about a weekend or two to write, and I didn't even write it actually. I kind of produced it because I got another guy to write it, and just sort of polished it. So the App Store was building at that point, and my friend Otmar, who's the father of Olivia, was fascinated by iPhones and really, he was really interested in the whole app business. So what happened next? Well, quite a lot of things happened, as the way they do, and Otmar, Honda Racing ceased to exist, and Otmar was suddenly out of a job. So there was a lot of changing, and I think it was, must have been November 2008. He was a little bit down, so we went for a walk around Oxford and visited a few pubs, traditional English pub crawl. By about the third pub, we got on to what could we do with apps. Otmar, he's in motor racing, he's not a software guy at all. So we were discussing, I think we came up with an awful lot of truly awful ideas for apps at the time. But we turned our attention to what we could do for Formula One. And he said, you know what would be great? If we could have the timing screen in the palm of our hands. Every time we're in the paddock, that's what everybody watches. If you could put that timing screen on the device, that'd be great. And I said, you know what, I think we can do one better. Because if you can tell us where the cars are, we could show people where the cars are, and that would be great. And he said, yeah, we know where the cars are. The teams know where the cars are. I don't think anybody else really knows where the cars are, but I'll go and get a meeting with Bernie. Which was like, okay. I thought, okay, he might be able to do that, but he'd probably get distracted, and it's quite a lot to suddenly walk up. 3 weeks later, we were in front of Bernie Ecclestone. We hadn't really prepared very much, so all those well-prepared pitches and everything you hear about, we didn't really do one of those. We had 3 pieces of paper, which a graphic artist had put together actually in his spare time because he was interested after my conversation about what we do, of what it might look like. And I get a phone call from Otmar saying, I think it was at 1 o'clock, we're going to go and see Bernie, we need to be in Knightsbridge by 3 o'clock. So we quickly printed things out. He came flying out. I flew down the road, and we're sitting in front of Bernie. We have a half-hour meeting, which Otmar's discussing team stuff. But at the end, we get to the app. And I think to summarize the pitch, the most important thing about the app was when we said, we can tell you who's just driven past. And that got Bernie's eyebrows to raise, and he got interested. So he quickly got on the phone to someone who came down, and we started talking. Negotiations went on. Oh, actually got the screenshot. That was the original design. I didn't worry about the negotiations because I worried after leaving the meeting, Christ, I've actually sold this idea, and now we've got to make it work. So that was the original blueprint design, which the graphic artist put together. It's interesting because the map we originally conceived as a flat projection, and he projected it in 3D because he's a graphic artist, and that makes it look nicer. And that suddenly got my mind ticking that it would be really useful if you could actually navigate the map. So I made my life much harder at that point. I originally had an idea that we were going to do it with HTML and put it in a frame, and quickly, no. That wasn't going to happen. I could see that with about 5 minutes of actual research and development into what you could do with the HTML browsers at the time on the devices aren't fast enough, really, to do what I wanted to do. And I wanted to make it really rich. So it was time to learn Objective-C, because I'd never written any before, because unfortunately the last project I got somebody else to do most of the Objective-C. So Christmas time, I have Christmas projects. That tends to be the way my life works. And I sat down with Xcode for the first time, and I started banging away. And I quickly discovered that it was a really good environment to work in. In fact, it evoked memories of when I was 15 writing software for Ataris and Amigas and things, where stuff just, you could put things together which ran quickly and you could debug it and all the tools there. It had kind of both the good and the bad bits. The devices, the phones at the time were quite slow. They're much slower than a PC anyway. But they have incredible graphic hardware, which if you can harness it, is very powerful. So we looked through, I also got a friend involved at this point because it became apparent that there was two sides to this. One was the server, which was going to deliver all this information, and one was the client, the iPhone app. To apportion work, I took the app side, my friend took the server side. We really had to divide it down the middle because you can't, I can't develop in two languages at the same time, and we went for Java on the server and obviously Objective-C on the client. So this was the plan. We go from the cars, we go to race control, we go to Biggin Hill, we go to Docklands, we go to the cloud, we go to the users. And we're going to do this in 4 seconds, and we've got to present all this stuff. And we're going to do it as soon as possible for the next season. That was one of the criteria. So the way we attacked it was, well, luckily, the first 3 bits are Formula One. They had to actually generate a feed they didn't have because, as mentioned before, the teams have the feed of where the cars are, but it turns out that Biggin Hill didn't, the centralized Formula One didn't. There was some wrangling over whether it should be GPS or timing loop data, and it turned out that timing loop was a lot easier to solve because the timing loops are actually owned by Formula One, or the information from them is all owned by Formula One, and it's all collected. And it has other benefits because in the timing loop data, you've got absolute precision regardless of the environment. GPS is actually quite unreliable at speed, which is often not mentioned. But if you've got a car, especially cars which accelerate up to 200 and back down again in a matter of seconds, I mean, it's sort of 10, 15 seconds to get the whole range they can do, the GPS units get very confused and they lag a lot and everything else. So you end up needing to find ways to supplement that. The teams do it through wheel speed and things. We do it by just having the timing loops. So we produced a feed of where there are 34 timing loops on an F1 track, which is much higher than I realized. There are only 3 sectors reported most of the time, but they actually have lots more timing loops for error checking and validation. So we took this timing loop feed, or Nigel took the timing loop feed and converted it into something which we could use. We then had the fun of the telephone network. So we knew that delivering this data, we had to make it very small, which is another reason why web-type technologies were not going to be great. We update every second the client, so we needed to send a packet a second, basically. So everything became raw networking to achieve this. We compress everything up, and it's pretty stateless, so it's got lots of good bits of design in it for ways to solve that problem. The next thing we had to worry about was obviously the massive number of users which you potentially have to deal with. We're delivering this worldwide, so we use the cloud. We use Amazon Web Services because if you want to cost-effectively deliver, we got some lucky things about the way we work. It's very important that we have massive bandwidth and capacity for basically an hour and a half, 2 hours on each of those days. The rest of the time, we don't need very much at all. So with one centralized server doing the processing, we then just need to go to the cloud to send out all the data to everybody. So the sessions are run from our server, and then we fire up as many instances from Amazon as we want, and it's a very powerful way of going about it. We found that Amazon will take enormous amounts of data and shovel it out, and you probably couldn't cost-effectively buy that level of capacity, well, without using someone like Amazon, without using the cloud. Especially considering how much is available max them out. Well, we seldom max out many instances because the network is superb. So we had a target to go live as soon as possible, which I guess sounds obvious, but we didn't actually have the feed until Barcelona because it hadn't been fully tested by Formula One. They weren't going to give us something which wasn't finished. So by Barcelona, we had an app that looked roughly like that, unfinished graphics. But I actually went out to Barcelona and I stayed up until qualifying. I've still, ironically, never seen a race. I stayed up until qualifying, and we actually received data for the first time ever to my test phone, all the way across the network. Everything works. So that was a really good sign. We got to Monaco, and it turned out the reality struck of just how many things have to be perfect to get through the App Store review process, which I think has been mentioned before. Well, it's always been tough. It's never been an easy process, and the more complicated your app, the more difficult or more difficulties you can find. We'd been in touch with Apple, so they were willing to help us out to get things live, but we got to that race and we thought, this isn't quite ready, and we paused a race. So the next week we came back, and that proved to be a wise decision because we found so many problems with the Monaco race that would have been a showstopper. However, when we got to the end of that weekend, we knew how the whole thing worked, and we knew that it delivered the service we wanted it to do. So it was get it into the App Store. We put it into review, and Apple made us live on Saturday night of the Turkish Grand Prix, which I think we had no marketing. Nobody had mentioned us anywhere. We appeared, but by the race, we amazingly had 47 people who connected up, which was quite amazing because how they found it. It kind of shows the power of the App Store. It must have been just on the what's new type screens. So things moved on then because we launched at Silverstone officially. We hit the press, and all of a sudden life accelerated. We got an article on Formula1.com which skyrocketed our hits. Our website went mad and everything else, and the app got used a lot. We were really racing to catch up at that point because we were pushing so hard to get out. We discovered, now we've got to run another race. We had, I think, 3 maps in the original app. So we had to get new apps out, and we had to draw more maps, obviously. So the graphic artists we had working really had to put pedal to the metal and get them all sorted. We also had, obviously, the numerous problems which putting something live happens. You discover all those things that you never knew were going to happen because you've never tried to deliver a service to every part of the internet. Some of the interesting things we've learned, for instance, is that the whole of New Zealand is proxied, which, they don't tend to list anywhere on any information websites, but if you get your HTTP headers wrong, you won't see any pages change ever. Well, it takes about a week for them to refresh. So it can be a big mistake, especially if you're selling an app which relies on seeing a particular web page and all the rest of it. But you learn these things by experience. And experience grew quickly. We ran the next few races at what felt like a breakneck pace because there are a few, but then we get a summer break, so we got a bit of time to try to fix a few things. And then Apple started to get interested. They called us and they said, we want to do one of the, there's an app for that, and we want to do it for France. And to do it for France, we need the app in French. So that was a bit of a shock. It's great, we're going to get a TV ad, but we just need you to sort it out in French. So I'd never done a multilingual conversion before, and we did 3 languages actually, because we did German, French, and English. We had to get commentators for those languages because the whole of the app has to be in French for it to be featured on TV. So while the app itself was not difficult to localize, it turned out that some idiot had decided that it would be a good idea to put the entire F1 histories for all the drivers in. I think that was me. And we had 12,500 words to get translated in about a couple of weeks. So this took some late nights, and we came across some good services for internationalization. We got it out, and we got the marketing. We became firm favorites with Apple, I think, mainly because they liked the fact that we were an expensive app. When we were originally coming up with business models and everything else, app pricing looked sort of reasonable. You're selling an app for £4, £5, so many what's that? 5, 6 euros. As we were developing, we watched the price crash begin towards the 59 pence mark, or the 99 cent mark. And this worried us greatly, but we were not going to be that type of app. So we stood up for being a reasonable price. Since we're running a service, we definitely look at it as a service. The app is not just sold, and this is a mistake I think some people might make with apps. When you write them, they do have a long tail in terms of sales and also in support. They don't tend to just be finished, packaged, and left. Especially if you've got a web service to run, you've got to fill it with content and everything else. So that's a big consideration for anybody who's putting together an ongoing service, that maintenance becomes key. From our point of view, we had lots of problems to solve, which you kind of learn on the fly. When I originally spoke to Formula One, I said, what can happen in a race? Do you have a playbook of things? And the answer I got back rather helpfully was anything. Well, luckily anything didn't happen for the first few races, but it started to happen. We discovered driver changes happen. You have accidents which change parameters of the races. You have red flags that go on forever, and all sorts of things which stress the limits of what you can do. So when running a live service like this, we learned that actually the truth is more important than the beauty quite often. And often a lot of the things that you think were important at the beginning, which you could have spent a long time engineering, won't actually prove to be as important as you first thought. For instance, we have all sorts of ways of making servers redundant and things, which we put in at the beginning thinking that was the way it was going to work. In reality, when things go wrong, you need different processes. It's not normally your server that goes wrong. It's usually the feed breaks or something, and you need a way to deal with that intermittent problem. You also need to be able to build on the fly. I have compiled the code during a race, so that's a rather stressful moment when that happens. You try to avoid them. We don't get so many of them these days, but the early days were very exciting. So the story then continues because Formula One obviously have lots of big sponsors, and they started to get interested in the fact that we were doing quite well. And a lot of their sponsors wanted to see the app run on other devices. So we had to engage with other platforms, and we looked at lots of platforms actually. We started with looking at Nokia because we'd had some direct contact with Nokia through a friend, and we started working on a Nokia version. This had a lot of problems. The number one being that I'd written everything in Objective-C to do it quickly. So we basically had to rewrite the app, almost every single line. And that's kind of another lesson I learned, is that sometimes you just have to throw away what you've done and start again. And if you hit it head on, you can do it. So another app rewrite began. Luckily, you've already got a product, so you can move between the code bases, but you've got to get onto that new code base as soon as possible. So we converted everything across into basically, I went for the lowest common denominator. I actually went for raw C code. We still had several issues, like a leaderboard that we call a leaderboard at the top of the screen. I can't see it on there, which was still using Apple code. But luckily, we used OpenGL for the map and things, so a lot of that code could be easily converted. And we use a web browser for the information in the app. So we had a route. So we pursued Nokia for quite some time, but it became apparent that their toolchain was very heavy, hard work to work with. And there was an awful lot of indecision about which devices it would be appropriate for. We have quite a high hardware requirement because of the graphical nature of the app. So really, we wanted the next generation of phones from Nokia, and they weren't quite there yet. They didn't have 3D in hardware. So we swapped to Android. Luckily, we had written it in a way that we could with Android. We could take the Nokia work and swap it to Android. And life became a bit easier, though Android, the toolchain is not as good as Apple for debugging and quick work. So what we found was the easy way was to work with the toolchain on Apple and then take the code and convert it across. But we got it out. Well, actually, sorry, we didn't get it out. I'm running ahead of myself. MotoGP also wanted to have an app. They'd launched a previous app which had information and lap times in it, which was released at the same time as our app, and it kind of sunk without a trace in the charts, I think it's fair to say. After initial release, quite successful, but then people got bored with it because it was just an information app at the end of the day. So they were interested in taking what we'd done and using it for them. MotoGP turned out they were even more complicated on the weekends than F1. I'd not appreciated, in fact, almost up to the first race, that there were 3 series and we had to follow all of them. So the race weekend suddenly spawned from a couple of hours to 6 hours with an hour break for lunch. So we had to convert a lot of information. Luckily, they were set up to deliver an awful lot of the information, which for F1 we built manually. They were set up with quite a sophisticated feed setup. And we put the app together, and we got it out for the first race. So it was a pretty close run thing, but we got it out for the first race. And then the world exploded again. The iPad appearing. Everybody was talking about it. And Apple said, would you like to come and help us with the iPad launch? So all of a sudden, we had a kind of dual projects going on. We had a recently launched MotoGP app, and we had an iPad conversion. Luckily, at Christmas, I'd realized that it was getting a bit manic, and I'd hired another guy to help me out on the coding side. So he got on with making sure, getting familiar with the platform and what we'd written, and started work on finishing all the Android issues we had still outstanding, while I got on with getting the iPad version ready. But it was all worth it because we got to be focused, a feature app on the iPad page. I think we're still there, actually, on apple.com. And we got mentioned in the iOS 4 keynote by Steve Jobs. So all of that was much appreciated publicity, and is obviously quite an unusual thing to happen to an app. But the story continues. They then produced, of course, the iPhone 4, and the Retina display came out. This produced a new pain, actually, on the graphic artists, because the Retina display suddenly, if you've been working with assets which were designed for like a little screen and low DPI, adding dots per inch is not very easy, and effectively everything had to be reworked to give it a high-res nature. I'm impressed actually at how many apps managed to get Retina as quickly as they did. It's probably less of an issue now because everyone knows that exists, but it was definitely a challenging time. The next thing was what next year was going to bring, because obviously you finish one year and the racing season never stops. So we started thinking about what we could bring to the party next year. I was very keen to add audio to the app. This is actually for MotoGP. F1 we haven't added audio to for licensing reasons. But MotoGP were keen for us to add an audio commentary feed. One of the key constraints I'd put on the app in the beginning was it had to work over GPRS. I don't know what it's like in Spain, but in Oxford, you don't often see much above GPRS. You get some 3G occasionally, it comes in, it disappears, and everything else. It's getting a bit better, but it's still very patchy. I was very keen for it to work in muddy fields, basically, where this app was wanting to be used at the track. They often don't have the world's best networking infrastructure in the middle of fields, but GPRS has got big coverage. So that means very low bandwidth. So our audio was designed as a big compromise in quality to ensure that you could actually get it everywhere. And so we've got quite a unique solution there. The other things we did was basically spruce it all up, adding corners and trying to bring the map more to life. The other big thing we have inside the app is, because it's a premium app, we try to go from the start for premium features. So we added features like being able to replay races. This caused us an awful lot of pain in the beginning, but was very good at getting your mind right for what you wanted to achieve in the future. So we were able, after getting that all right, to add replay very, very quickly. Live replay then came in so people could pause, because it turned out in the States they tape delay, as they call it, all the TV coverage by about 5 minutes, which means our app becomes pretty useless because you know the result 5 minutes before it's happened. But now you can actually delay the live feed and keep track of it. And the other thing we did was we unified the code base with Android, which was much needed because the entire interface now is handled in OpenGL. And that is it in action. That's a photograph taken by one of the guys in Silverstone at the MotoGP that happened last weekend, I think it was. And I don't know if you can see from the audience, but we tried to highlight where the drivers are. There's Hayden and Edwards and I think it's Basta. I don't know how it's pronounced. And if you look on the map, you can actually see the cars are almost exactly, bikes rather, are almost exactly where they should be. We've worked out actually that the delay, the latency is not 4 seconds. It's probably, on a relatively decent signal, you'll be about 1 second, possibly even less. Amazingly, Formula One can get their data back from Australia in 180 milliseconds, which is pretty awesome for anyone that's into networking. So I thought I'd quickly summarize what we see from the markets, from our experience. iTunes, they've got the best tools, no questions asked, the hands down best development environment. The debugger works, it's quick to launch the simulator, which is a problem for a lot of people. The simulator is actually a benefit over using the device for quick debugging, which it isn't actually with Nokia and with Android. It's got a very slow review process. That's really its weak point. But that does help you and force you to produce good quality code. The Android market has great potential. The recent refresh, we're seeing sales jump actually because they've got charts and such like in there. Before it was web accessible, and it definitely was a bit haphazard, but it's improving at a rate of knots. However, the tools are quite poor. And the other thing which people don't seem to realize or haven't picked up on yet is it's actually quite expensive, the Android market. it's about 3% more because you also pay a transaction fee every time they pay you, so you pay 30% and then you pay from 1.6 to 3% transaction fee. Plus, you've got to deal with all your own taxes, which makes life more complicated than a lot of people realize on the Android market. Hopefully, this will be resolved. Apple actually make it quite a bit simpler, and they handle all the tax things correctly. So how do we do it? We work on Apple. We write portable C. We avoid complex language features. That's a good lesson, actually. If you're developing for some of these platforms, then you can get carried away with going down a path. Having been bitten once by developing for Apple, Apple only, I wasn't going to get bitten again. So we try to avoid anything too complicated. Everything basically is like BSD-style code, and as much of it as possible. And then we just have the bits which have to be done in the OS living there. We draw the UI in OpenGL. I can't recommend that to many people. Most people I would recommend HTML. All the stuff we can do in HTML we do. But if you need performance, there's nothing to beat OpenGL cross-platform. It runs very well now on Android devices. Most Android devices can do it in hardware. And Apple have superb OpenGL support. And they've got some really good debuggers now for it. So then you build the stuff from the command line, because that's the way Android seems to work, and you test on the device. Never, ever, ever ship to the store without testing on the device. And that's as many devices as you can, and preferably the oldest devices. We don't test on the newer devices, we test on the older devices. They're always the ones which show up the problems that you missed. iOS 3 we still support, and that's obviously the iPod Touch is still using iOS 3, so you have to be very careful to make sure that it doesn't break because you've used some OS 4 feature, or it's just too slow or whatever. It highlights all sorts of problems running on older hardware. So although it's not as cool, it's definitely your first port of call. I think all developers, I'm getting one of those type of people, all developers should use older machines and older equipment to write things on, so it looks great on the new stuff because it looks good on the older stuff. I just thought I'd mention some HTML application things. I'm not convinced that they're an answer at the moment at all. I think effectively the performance of the devices has still got a long way to go. They're getting quicker, but and for certain types of applications, the social media stuff and everything else, yeah, I can see the HTML, but there is definitely a large class of applications that need beyond HTML apps. And actually, native apps aren't hard to write. They've got a lot better. It's quite straightforward. In fact, if you're single platform and you don't mind going the Apple way, then it's surprisingly easy to throw up an app that has resizing and all those difficult things, which are actually quite hard to do in HTML cross-platform. HTML becomes quite a burden to manage cross-platform. And the other person I thought we should mention is that Apple currently are blocking. I think they've definitely slowed down the web browser in-app. We've noticed some JavaScript is not as performant as it possibly was. So we think that there's going to be a little bit of a war over that. I suspect it will get quicker and run better, but it means that if you're designing an app with some HTML components, you have to be quite careful on how much you want it to do in HTML. And people also remembering how much better native code works, because it has been very enlightening to me, certainly, at any rate, how much more you can do. Because I've been writing HTML for ages and ages and ages, but it really is an option again now. It's not hard, and actually it can be quite cathartic, I found, writing some stuff in that. If you're thinking up app ideas, make sure you think internationally. You've got a large sales base. You've got hundreds of millions of people, all the good headline stuff, but you've got to remember that there are lots of telecos out there which have very weak networks, and you can't really rely on them. It's time-consuming to support each market, and that's certainly starting to hit us as we're starting to do things with carriers and all the rest of it. You will take a hit if you start trying to support too much at the beginning. If you're just starting out, I really would target one platform and then work out a strategy to migrate rather than start out on every platform. It's quite tough, certainly if you're writing native code. And there's also the expectation of low price point if you're selling stuff, which luckily for us was less of an issue because of the power of our brand. So my final message is, you're probably not going to be Angry Birds. So when you're designing your app, be realistic about the size of its audience. And this is a big commercial decision. I think an awful lot of people have tried to produce games to compete against Angry Birds and found, you simply can't sell the numbers that Angry Birds sells with that particular game idea because it appeals to a certain demographic in some way. So I recommend pricing and designing your ideas accordingly. And there is a market, actually, for more expensive stuff. People will pay for quality, especially on the iPad. You can charge more than a lot of people appreciate. If you put the effort in and you're doing something unique, there's quite a good example in the navigation category, certainly in the UK, where there are a lot of £6, £7, £10 apps, because navigation is one of those things which, people come and they buy. And obviously the explosion of magazines and such like and the big players is starting to push up. People are starting to leverage their brands properly in the marketplace. So we're glad to see that. And with that, I'm open to questions. Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, yeah.
Hello.
Hi there.
My question is about Android platform. Can you please explain how you fight with different Android screen sizes and supporting of them?
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was an interesting challenge for us because at the same time we also had the Apple platform changes. So basically the answer was the expensive way. Our app was expensive to make, but we produced it all. We reworked the entire interface. Everything you see on the main screen is OpenGL. So by doing it in OpenGL, we then apply, we have two layers. We have a device scale, which is pretty much how the Apple Pixel, for Retina works, where we can scale the entire interface. And then we also have a device width. And the two work in parallel to expose more information if you extend the device width. And if you change the device scale, then it enlarges all the graphics. We get that for free because everything's rendered through OpenGL, and we've got Retina graphics. So for Android, you're almost always going to get the highest quality graphic because there's just starting to be devices which have got higher resolution than the Retina display. But it's very rare we don't have enough resolution in the source assets. So yeah.
Question about geolocation. Can you please explain how you build GPS coordinates on the custom map? Is it something triangulation, or you hard-coded the geolocation of the track?
Right. So how do we know where the bikes are, all the cars? Yeah. Well, basically, the actual process is on Thursday, they drive the safety car around the track. And they map out the track with a GPS, and then they also mark where all the timing loops are on the map as GPS coordinates. We then receive a feed that has the GPS coordinates of the timing loops when the cars cross them. It actually runs at sort of 20 hertz now, so they run it very quickly. And we then interpolate on the server first time, you see, we only received the positions of the timing loops. Now they actually do some interpolation on their side using some extra data. And then we interpolate on the client. It's a very difficult programming problem, actually, to interpolate accurately with basically patchy data. You can chase an awful lot of solutions which look great for the 90% case, but look far worse for the 10% case. So we've focused on something that looks good most of the time and tries not to do anything too erroneous, because the problem is when cars crash, basically, you never know quite what you're going to get back at that point. So you want to have something that doesn't do anything crazy. Quite a lot of work's gone in so that cars can't overtake themselves when they definitely haven't overtaken themselves and all the rest of it. But you also have to be very careful, because if you put a rule in to do that, there may be legitimate reasons, like all of a sudden none of your cars are overtaking each other. So it's quite a thorny problem, I think. We'll always be working on it. And the data will get better, because they're improving at their end all the metrics which are captured and everything else.
Thanks to Alex for sharing his story. It's very interesting for all developers.
Thank you. Is that right?
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
You're going to stay on?
Thank you, Alex. Okay.